Thank you so much for accommodating. I'm so sorry for not being able to be there today. Really wish I was there to work with you on all these things. So I'm going to keep it like fairly. This talk will be kind of like a view at a lot of different things. And because of the 7 minutes, I'll move pretty fast. And it's really meant to just kind of like stir up and inspire you with a bunch of ideas. And with both like the long-term potential, but with a bunch of like concrete ideas of how to get started. So let's go. I'm going to talk about how to use crypto tools to achieve Paretotropia or Paretotopia, depending on the flavor. And I'm going to go through like 3 parts. One, I'm going to kind of make the case as to why mechanism design can really help us achieve this, why it's an extremely critical century right now, and why crypto is this massive lever that can enable us. I'm going to walk through a set of examples of like very concrete mechanisms that you can deploy today, or like that are already deployed today, that are having massive scale impact, just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that you should be designing and thinking about building, and just kind of what the downstream impact could be. And then I'll just kind of like leave with some kind of inspirations of specific movements that to pay attention to, and some recommendations, and maybe some pointers to get more involved. There's some like related talks that I've given about this, and there's like related movements that I'll talk a little bit later. So this kind of like claim about a critical century. I think everybody in this room, gauging on familiar faces, are super aware that we've had like this massive amount of improvement over the last few centuries. We're facing some extremely difficult X risks, and we're kind of part of this like computing phase transition, and it's really unclear like what's going to happen over the next 80 years, or 200 or whatever, and it's extremely critical to make sure that this goes really well. And at the same time, our broader macro systems are pretty inadequate, so we don't have the toolings at a macro scale to be able to handle this kind of stuff. So achieving Paretotropia would be great, and like really critically here, the idea of being able to grow the pie of resources is one of the key things here. Like by collaborating and coordinating, it's not just that we have like the amazingly high value voluntary cooperation axis that Mark and Allison talk a lot about, but by cooperating, we can greatly expand our resources and our capabilities and so on, defeat these potential X risks or S risks, and potentially like make it up in the Kardashev scale, right? So like that's kind of like the potential here. Many other talks can elucidate as to this possibility. So now kind of in the micro perspective right now, like where we are today and where we're headed over the next 5 to 10, 15, 20 years, in those scales, right now, crypto economics is an extremely useful set of systems and mechanisms to cause this kind of coordination at a pretty huge scale. And one of the really cool things is that while we've been talking about these kinds of possibilities for many, many decades, we now have large-scale deployed systems operating at massive scale, relying on effectively like just economics and cryptography, and not relying at all on traditional law contracts or nation states or anything like that. And that's an amazing achievement. So it is really great to like see like the decades and decades of work piling up to get here. And it's really great to like we can now have these kind of like freestanding global utilities that can enable coordination at massive scale, and are really kind of built out of cryptography and economics and so on. So let's use all of this to try and achieve Paretotropia by thinking about the incentive landscape and warping it to kind of cause as much coordination as we possibly can. So just to give a sense of like why crypto is such a massive lever, just think about Bitcoin for a moment and think about the massive hash rate that is achieved by one single impact evaluator. I'll describe impact evaluators in a moment, but the block reward of Bitcoin is a single mechanism that is repeatable and like dependable, and that enables just this massive industry of participants consuming an enormous amount of electricity around the world. And so this is the kind of flavor of what you can get by deploying just like a single mechanism into the world. I guess in reality, there's a few mechanisms there because you have to have Bitcoin being able to be traded with fiat and so on, and you have to have accounts and whatnot. So like there's a collection of mechanisms, but the core point is like the biggest effect here is the block reward is causing this massive consumption of electricity worldwide. And so this is the kind of scale of potential here. Like this is now at a scale competing with nation states. And so in Filecoin, like we use this to great effect. Like we observe the potential of Bitcoin, like, and we used it, and we built this, and we now have like this massive like global public utility to build a data commons, which is pretty sweet. But kind of like getting into more concrete, shorter term examples to kind of maybe inspire you to kind of think about different things today and so on. I want to kind of like talk about a few very concrete things that you can get started with today, and who can chip away at like larger and larger problems. And the really key kind of like point here is that by starting with smaller things and getting them to work well, and then hooking them to this like massive crypto leverage platform that can then scale them, we can get to like pretty good outcomes. So the first one I want to talk about is this notion of an impact evaluator. We call them this. I don't think anybody else has been calling them this. It's this mechanism that we observed inspired by the Bitcoin block reward, where you have like this periodic system that is going to continue to reward participants based on some set of measurements against some objective. And so the idea here is like if you have a community of agents who share some objective and where you can measure the progress and impact against that objective, and you have a pool of funds, then you can deploy it, you can compose a program, deploy it into a blockchain, and just let it run in the world. And it'll cause this massive scale, it'll have this like massive scale coordination effect globally at the scale of the Bitcoin block reward. And so if you can think of like really hard problems and like chip away at those hard problems by finding sub-problems that are amenable to this construction, then you can like move mountains. Another component here that I think is like super interesting is that you can move a lot of the energy markets into crypto, and you can have, because of the programmable environment, you can generate many new kinds of instruments. And this is an area where like we've been doing a bunch of experiments on how to like measure and account all of the energy use in a broader network, and then kind of like try and tie it very directly to renewable energy coming out from the grids, precisely where the energy is being drawn. And we get to do this because of like all of the facilities that we can lean on. And so I think like just in general, green tech and climate change problems can be significantly impacted by these crypto mechanisms. And I would kind of, again, carbon credits have gotten a bad rap over the years, but they're an extremely good idea. And they've been cleaned up over time, and that we've ratcheted them up into a better instruments. And it's also yielded a lot of new kind of follow-on instruments like renewable energy certificates and many other kinds of things. So I think like leaning more on these kinds of things and leveraging the fact that like crypto gives you this global 24/7 massive scale market is I think super useful. And the fact that you can add verifiability to those things is really good. So like you're making like all of the information and verifiability like legible to computers. And you know there's some possibility here like where you can, for all the some of you might be familiar with like the planetary boundaries framework, where like there's climate change is like one of like many potential problems. You could design like networks of impact evaluators to try and like force humanity to sort of like keep the world along a certain set of like predefined ranges to keep the planet like adjusted close to where we want to be. And so think of like deploying like massive scale economic structures that kind of drive that sort of behavior. One other idea I want to kind of seed here, and this is definitely like one for that you kind of like read through and maybe watch another talk and so on about, is this idea of hypercerts. And this is kind of like a standard for impact certificates. And the broader point is to kind of create a way to retroactively reward participants who are doing really good works or producing public goods for a network. And the whole idea relies on producing these markets in the future where people are going to be able to sell the credit of producing the impact. And you want to be able to kind of like send the money back in time, so to speak, to speculators who are like rewarding participants today for doing this kind of like useful, valuable work. Hypercerts is a standard to like make impact certificates work on blockchains with NFTs. You can talk to Evan about them. Evan's working on this as well. This is a super interesting, potentially really useful component. Another idea that I want to kind of like encourage you to think about is this notion of like network funds. So there seems to be like an analogous construction to venture capital, where if in venture capital you have an optimization network for stable cash flows, where kind of like the core unit is like the VC fund that trades in cash and stock certificates, in kind of like in a feed forward or backprop sort of way, then you can come up with like an analogous optimization network for the production of network goods, as well as like kind of like pulpy goods and so on, where you're trading cash for impact certificates. And so we can get impact certificates to work. Then a follow-on idea that could be extremely powerful is the idea of like building these kind of like larger scale network funds that can produce like large scale optimization and solve a bunch of like the resource allocation problems that come from kind of like traditional grant funding. Like large scale grant funding suffers from serious problems because like the optimization framework is broken. Like you don't get the reward signals and the are not coupled to like the actual success. And so this might be a way of like solving that. Cool. So some ideas, because like I'm probably out of time, just some ideas for getting started. I tend to think a lot about accelerating science and technology improvement. So I tend to think about capital allocation. A lot of this stuff can be greatly improved by crypto primitives. There's a growing movement around DeSci, where many participants are trying to figure out like good mechanisms to kind of improve how science works. A lot of us are working on kind of like better mechanisms for coordinating the funding and maintenance and governance of commons. And so there's a whole movement called Funding the Commons around this. And I'll give you like some very concrete recommendations. So we have really long levers now. So you can really move the world in a massive scale. Like blockchains give you specifically, like not just all of humanity, but you specifically massive leverage. Just think of like Satoshi like deploying just the block reward impact evaluator. You have that kind of power now. And so it's really useful, like use it to improve the world. The second point is like establish a strong experimental loop where you can ideate, simulate, experiment, deploy, and scale. And along the way, you're reporting on the ideas, you're reporting on the simulations, you're reporting experiments. And really don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We don't have a lot of time on a lot of these kinds of problems, and it's much better to like make things incrementally better. So really start somewhere, deploy, and build a system that can upgrade into a better one. So like ratchet up upgrades over time. And you really have to kind of like get the incentives right enough. And building on a prior point, you don't have to get them right away, but you have to upgrade into that. So like be careful deploying in systems where you can't adjust the incentives down the road. You have to enable them to kind of adapt and change the landscape. And the last point would be like speed. Like worse is better. Like returns compound really quickly. Like the future is like every like second or minute that passes without like some like really useful contribution is like vast like futures are lost, right? And so I really encourage you to like get started, deploy good things, and kind of like really build upgradability into the systems, and like kind of like turn off valves or turn off switches. Like one of the problems with Bitcoin, for example, is there's like the massive energy consumption right now from like fossil fuels, right? And so like now we have to come back and like clean it up with like other RECs and other kinds of things. But that kind of like we could have like adjusted that a different way. Some quick pointers around. There's gonna be a bunch of events around DevCon, Shelling Point, Funding the Commons, Sustainable Blockchain Summit, and then Lab Week right after DevCon in October and November. Funding the Commons, CryptoEcon Day, and a bunch of other stuff. Great, thank you so much. Sorry for like the lightning fast view into a lot of things. Hope this was interesting or useful, and that's it.
It was both, Juan. Thank you.